"What do you think you're doing in my bed?" Mr. Caleb's voice cut through the silence like a blade through glass. He stood in the doorway of his master bedroom, his tall frame stiff, eyes burning with disbelief. Rainwater dripped from his coat and pooled at his feet, but he didn't notice. His entire focus was locked on the woman lying on his bed grace. She shot up, startled, her breath trembling. The two little boys, Ethan and Ryan, were curled beside her, fast asleep between the sheets. Their faces were soft, calm, at peace for the first time in days. One held a teddy bear close to his chest, the other's tiny hand still clutched Grace's sleeve. "I can explain," she whispered quickly, her voice gentle so she wouldn't wake them. They were scared again. Ryan had a nightmare. Ethan, he didn't let her finish. The sound of his hand striking her cheek filled the room. A single, hard slap, sharp, final. Grace stumbled back, one hand pressed to her face. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She didn't even speak. The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. From the bed came a small sob. Ryan had woken up. Ethan stirred beside him, eyes half open, nose bleeding again from the stress. Grace turned immediately, her voice soft, calming. "It's okay, sweetheart. It's okay. You're safe." The boys reached for her at once, burying their faces in her arms. Mr. Caleb froze. His chest rose and fell hard, his anger twisting into confusion. He watched as the woman he had just struck cradled his sons with a tenderness that didn't belong to a stranger. She looked at him, only one's hurt in her eyes, but no hatred. Then she turned back to the twins, whispering, "Go back to sleep." The rain outside grew louder, tapping against the tall windows like an audience holding its breath. He took a step back, but his voice came out low, trembling under control. "Pack your things. You're done here." Grace didn't argue. She just nodded once, still rocking the boys until they drifted back into sleep. When she finally stood, her cheek was red, her eyes calm. She looked at him one last time and said quietly, "They finally slept, sir. That's all that matters." She walked out slowly, leaving him standing there in the echo of his own mistake. The rain fell hard that night. Grace walked down the long marble hallway of the Caleb mansion with her small brown bag clutched to her chest. Her cheek still burned, but it wasn't the pain that hurt, it was the sound of the slap still echoing in her head. She reached the front door and paused. Behind her, everything was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't mean peace, but shame. She turned once. Through the half-open door of the master bedroom, she could still see the faint glow of the bedside lamp. The twins were sleeping again. She whispered a soft prayer under her breath. "Please, God, keep them calm tonight." Then she stepped outside. The cold rain soaked her thin gray dress in seconds, but she didn't cover herself. She walked down the driveway slowly, like someone who didn't want to break the silence she was leaving behind. A taxi light blinked at the gate. She waved it down. When the driver saw her wet face and trembling hands, he didn't ask questions. "Where to, miss?" "Anywhere," she said quietly. "Just away from here." Inside the mansion, Mr. Caleb stood in the middle of his bedroom, still breathing heavily. His hand hung at his side, his palm stinging from what he had done. Rain drummed against the windows, filling the silence he couldn't bear. He looked toward the bed. The boys were asleep again, both curled close together. Ethan's teddy bear had fallen to the floor. Mr. Caleb bent down, picked it up, and placed it beside his son. The boy murmured softly and turned his face toward the sound. For the first time in months, both children were sleeping peacefully. And she was gone. The realization hit him like a blow. His anger drained away, replaced by something heavier shame. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to understand why he had lost control. The image of Grace's calm eyes, the way she shielded the boys even after he struck her, wouldn't leave his mind. Margaret, the housekeeper, entered quietly with a folded towel. "Sir," she said softly, "the children are asleep. I'll stay with them tonight." He nodded without looking up. "Where is she gone? Did she say anything?" Margaret hesitated. "Only that the boys finally slept. She left this." She handed him a small note, damp at the edges from her wet hands. He unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was simple and neat. "And GT, if you can't stay for them, sir, don't push away the ones who can." He stared at the words until they blurred. His throat tightened. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. Margaret's voice trembled slightly. "She didn't do anything wrong, Mr. Caleb." The boys had another panic episode. Ryan was shaking. Ethan got a nosebleed. "She took them here because they feel safe near you, and they slept." Her voice broke. She was just trying to help. Mr. Caleb pressed a hand to his mouth and turned away. The shame was unbearable. "I'll find her in the morning," he muttered. By dawn, the storm had eased, but the mansion felt colder. Ethan woke first. "Where's Grace?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. Margaret forced a small smile. "She had to go, dear." "When is she coming back?" Ryan's voice was thin and scared. No one answered. When Mr. Caleb came down for breakfast, both boys sat at the table, untouched plates in front of them. Ethan's teddy bear sat on his lap, its ear damp with tears. Ryan wouldn't look at his father. "Eat something," Mr. Caleb said quietly. Ethan shook his head. "Grace always says we pray first." Margaret placed a hand on Mr. Caleb's shoulder. "Maybe you should let them." He nodded. The twins bowed their heads. Ethan whispered the same small prayer Grace had taught them. "Thank you for today. Help Daddy not be sad. Help Miss Grace come back." Mr. Caleb's chest tightened. He had nothing to add. The rest of the day moved in slow motion. He tried to work in his office, but the papers blurred. Every room he entered felt emptier. Grace's folded blanket still lay on the sofa in the nursery. Her tea mug still sat near the window. Everything about her presence was quiet, but it had kept the house alive. Now even the walls seemed to breathe differently. At noon, Margaret found him staring out at the rain-soaked garden. "Sir," she said gently, "you can still make this right." He turned to her, his eyes red, but dry. "I don't know where she went. She left a trail for you," Margaret said softly. "People like her don't disappear. They keep helping someone somewhere." He looked at her, unsure what she meant. "She used to talk about a community center in Harlem," Margaret continued. "Said she volunteered there before this job. If she's anywhere, she'll be with people who need her." He thought about that for a long moment. "If I find her, do you think she'll forgive me?" Margaret sighed. "Forgiveness isn't the hard part, sir. Earning her trust back is." That night, the twins refused to sleep alone. Mr. Caleb sat beside their beds, watching the rain begin again outside. Ethan's small voice broke the silence. "Daddy, did you make Grace cry?" He swallowed hard. "Yes," he said softly. "And I wish I hadn't." Ryan turned toward him, eyes half closed. "Then bring her back." He looked at them, at their tired faces, at the peace that only her presence could give. "I'll try," he whispered. "I promise." Hours later, when the house was finally quiet, he walked back into the master bedroom. The room still smelled faintly of her lavender soap. He looked at the spot where she had sat with the boys, the place where he had struck her, and whispered to the empty air, "I'm sorry." Rain pattered softly against the window again, like an answer he couldn't hear. The next morning, sunlight struggled through gray clouds that hung over Westchester. The mansion was quiet, except for the sound of coffee dripping and the soft shuffle of small feet upstairs. Mr. Caleb stood by the window in his white shirt sleeves, watching the driveway. The storm had passed, but inside him it still rained. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Grace's face-calm, forgiving but wounded. Margaret entered quietly, holding a small envelope. "Sir, I found this in the guest room," she said. It was under her pillow. He opened it slowly. Inside was a piece of paper torn from a notebook. "And GT, I'm not angry, sir. I just can't stay where peace is punished. The boys need calm, not fear. Please tell them I care." Grace, he folded it carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket. "Get the car ready," he said. Margaret looked at him. "Do you know where to go?" "Yes," he said softly. "Harlem." It took nearly an hour to reach the Harlem Community Center. The air was busy, children running, laughter echoing, buses honking down the street. It felt nothing like the cold silence of the mansion. Mr. Caleb parked a block away and walked toward the brick building with its peeling paint and bright murals of smiling faces. The noise of the city wrapped around him like a reminder of what real life sounded like. Inside, a woman with braids sat at the front desk, typing on an old computer. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for someone," he said. "Grace." The woman looked up, skeptical. "We got 3 Graces here. You'll need to be specific. She's quiet, small frame, kind eyes, probably wearing something simple. She used to work as a nanny." The woman leaned back, thinking. "Sounds like our Grace in the reading room. Down the hall. Second door left. But if you upset her, I'll know." He nodded, his throat dry. He walked down the narrow hallway. Children's laughter echoed faintly. The smell of crayons and chalk dust filled the air. Through the open door, he saw her. Grace sat on a small chair surrounded by 6 kids, reading softly from a book. Her voice was gentle, steady, the same voice that used to calm his sons. A little girl with braids leaned against her knee, holding a picture book upside down. Grace smiled faintly and turned the page. Her hair was loose today, falling around her face. She looked tired but peaceful. Mr. Caleb froze at the doorway. For the first time, he saw her outside his mansion belonging somewhere, needed by people who didn't care about status or paychecks, just kindness. When she noticed him, her voice stopped mid-sentence. The children looked up curiously. "Miss Grace?" one of them asked. "You okay?" Grace stood slowly. "Keep reading, sweetheart. I'll be right back." She stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind her. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. "Why are you here?" He hesitated. "I came to apologize." "You already did," she said quietly. "With your hands." He winced. "I deserve that." She crossed her arms, her tone still soft. "You hit me in front of your children, Mr. Caleb. You broke something they trusted, something they'll remember." "I know," he said. "I lost control. I thought you thought wrong." He nodded, taking a slow breath. "Grace, I don't expect forgiveness. But the boys, they can't sleep. They ask for you every morning. Ryan thinks you're coming back. Ethan refuses breakfast until someone prays like you do." Her eyes softened slightly. "They're good boys. They're broken without you." She looked down. "And what about you, sir? Are you broken too?" His voice cracked. "I am. For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of children laughing down the hall filled the silence between them. Finally, Grace said quietly, "I didn't stay because of the pay. I stayed because I saw how scared those boys were and how much you were trying to hide your pain." He looked at her, tears forming but held back. "Their mother's death changed everything. I tried to control what I couldn't fix. And when you walked in, you brought peace I didn't understand. It scared me." She nodded slowly. "Fear can turn into anger if you don't face it." He took a step closer. "I want to make it right. Please, Grace, come back not as staff, but as family." She blinked, unsure she heard right. Family? Yes. Not the maid. Not the help. The woman who made my children laugh again. She looked away, her voice trembling slightly. "Do you know how many times people have promised to treat me like family? It always ends the same Wyon till I remember I'm not. I'm not them," he said firmly. "I mean it." For the first time since he arrived, her eyes met his fully. "If I come back, it won't be the same. I'll have my conditions. Anything," he said quickly. "No yelling in front of the boys," she said. "No secrets, no cameras in their rooms, and no treating me like I don't belong." He nodded, his voice low. "You have my word." Grace took a deep breath. "Then I'll think about it." He exhaled shakily, relief and guilt mixing inside him. "Thank you." She turned to go back into the reading room. Before she opened the door, she said softly, "Tell Ethan and Ryan I'll visit soon, but don't promise them anything yet." He nodded. "I understand." When she walked away, her hand brushed the doorway, and for a brief second, he saw something he hadn't seen in months' hope. Outside, as he stepped into the afternoon sun, his driver asked, "Find who you were looking for, sir?" Mr. Caleb looked toward the community center's faded sign and nodded slowly. "Yes, and I'm not leaving without making things right." That evening, back at the mansion, Ethan and Ryan waited by the window. When the sound of the car pulling into the driveway echoed, they ran downstairs. "Did you find her?" Ethan asked, eyes wide with hope. Mr. Caleb knelt down. "I did." "Is she coming back?" Ryan whispered. He smiled faintly. "She said she'll visit soon." The boys hugged each other, whispering she's coming back over and over. Margaret watched from the kitchen doorway, her eyes misty. "Looks like you finally did something right, sir." Mr. Caleb nodded, looking toward the window, where the rain had finally stopped. "Not yet," he said quietly, "but I will." The next morning came quietly. The mansion felt alive again, even though Grace wasn't there yet. Ethan and Ryan had already put on their shoes and waited by the big window. They didn't eat breakfast, didn't play with their toys. They just waited. "Maybe she changed her mind," Ryan said, his voice small. Ethan shook his head. "She said she'll visit. Grace never lies." Upstairs, Mr. Caleb stood in front of the mirror, fixing his shirt. He didn't recognize himself. The man staring back looked tired, but human again. Not the cold man who hid behind work and anger, but someone trying to rebuild what he had broken. When he came down the stairs, Margaret met him halfway. "She called," she said softly. His heart skipped. "Grace?" Margaret nodded. "She's coming by this morning." For a second, he couldn't speak. Then he simply said, "Thank you." By 10 o'clock, a small taxi stopped at the front gate. Grace stepped out, wearing a plain cream blouse and a brown skirt. Her bag hung from her shoulder, and the morning breeze lifted her hair slightly. She stood still for a moment, looking at the mansion. It was the same house she had left in the rain, yet it felt different, now quieter, almost waiting for her. The gate opened slowly. She walked up the stone path, her heart heavy but steady. When she reached the front steps, the door opened before she could knock. Mr. Caleb stood there. For a long moment, neither spoke. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," he replied, his voice low. "Careful, please. Come in." Grace stepped inside. The familiar smell of polished wood and lavender filled her senses. The twins' laughter echoed faintly from upstairs. It made her chest tighten. "I'm glad you came," he said. "I'm not here for you, sir," she replied quietly. "I'm here for them." "I know," he said, "but I'm still grateful." When the twins saw her, everything changed. Ethan shouted first, "Grace!" Ryan came running behind him, barefoot, almost tripping on the rug. She barely had time to open her arms before they crashed into her, hugging her tightly. "You came back," Ethan cried. "I told you I would," she whispered, kissing their heads gently. "Did you miss me?" Ryan nodded hard. Every day. Margaret stood in the doorway watching, her hand over her heart. Mr. Caleb looked at them, the sight nearly breaking him. He had seen his sons cry before, seen them scared, angry, and silent, but he had never seen them this alive. Grace pulled back gently and smiled. "All right, my boys. Go wash up. We'll have breakfast together, okay?" They nodded eagerly and ran off. She turned to Mr. Caleb. "Where do we start?" He exhaled. "Wherever you want." In the kitchen, the four of them sat at the table. For the first time, there were no maids, no formal silence, no tension, just the sound of plates and little voices. Grace poured juice for the twins, then looked at Mr. Caleb. No phones, no meetings. He raised an eyebrow. "You're giving me orders now?" "Yes," she said simply. "Family rules." He smiled faintly. "Fair enough." They ate quietly for a while. The boys told stories about school, about how Margaret tried to cook pancakes and made them too salty. Everyone laughed, even Mr. Caleb. When breakfast was over, Grace wiped the table and said, "We need new house rules, ones everyone agrees on." "Like what?" Ethan asked. She thought for a moment. "No shouting. Always say please and thank you, and everyone eats together." Ryan added, "And no scary stories before bed." Mr. Caleb chuckled. "Agreed." Ethan looked serious. "And Daddy has to tuck us in every night." That one caught him off guard. He hesitated. "I can try." Grace looked at him gently. "Not try. Do." He nodded slowly. "I'll do it." Margaret smiled from the doorway. "I'll write the rules down and put them on the fridge." Grace nodded. "Good. We'll all sign them later." Later that afternoon, the boys napped in the living room, curled up with their toys. Grace sat quietly near the window, sewing a button on one of Ryan's shirts. Mr. Caleb entered quietly. He stood for a moment, watching her. The sunlight touched her face softly, catching the faint scar on her cheek from the night he struck her. The sight made his stomach twist with guilt. "I still think about that night," he said quietly. Grace didn't look up. "So do I. I hate myself for it," he said. "You don't have to hate yourself," she replied. "You just have to change." He sat across from her. "I'm trying." "I can see that," she said, finally meeting his eyes. "But you can't fix everything overnight. Healing takes time. I just want to make it right." She nodded. "Then start small. Listen more. Shout less." He smiled faintly. "You sound like a therapist." "I'm not," she said softly. "I just know what pain looks like." When evening came, the twins woke up full of energy. Grace helped them with their baths and dressed them for bed. Mr. Caleb watched from the doorway, silent. Ethan climbed into bed and looked at his father. "Daddy, you promised." Mr. Caleb nodded. "I did." He sat between the two beds, holding a children's book. His voice was awkward at first, too formal. But the boys didn't care. They laughed when he mispronounced words, corrected him loudly, and finally leaned against his shoulders. When they fell asleep, Grace stood in the doorway, smiling quietly. "You did good," she whispered. He looked up at her, his voice soft. "Because you showed me how." They walked out together into the hallway. The mansion felt warmer now. "I was thinking," he said after a moment, "maybe you could help me build something bigger, something lasting. Not just for the boys, but for other children like them. A place where they can feel safe." She turned to him, curious. "Like a foundation?" He nodded. "Yes. You'd run it. I'll fund it." Grace blinked. "That's a big dream." He smiled slightly. "So are you." She said nothing for a long moment. Then finally, she nodded. "We'll call it something that means hope." He smiled softly. "We'll decide together." As she walked away down the hall, he whispered, "Thank you for coming back." Grace stopped and turned slightly, her voice calm but full of quiet power. "I didn't come back for you, Mr. Caleb. I came back for peace." He nodded slowly. "Then I'll make sure you find it here." That night, as the rain began again outside, Grace stood by the window in her small guest room. She could hear the twins breathing softly down the hall. The house no longer felt haunted. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "This time, I'm not walking on eggshells." Outside, thunder rolled far away, but for once, she wasn't afraid of storms. Weeks passed. The mansion that once felt like a cage had turned into a home. Laughter replaced the silence, and warmth filled the walls that had known too many tears. Grace woke early every morning, opening the curtains to let the sunlight in. The twins would come running in their pajamas, fighting for the first hug. Mr. Caleb often stood at the hallway corner, watching quietly, the sight of his sons smiling freely still something that amazed him every single day. One morning, as the twins ran off to get dressed for school, he stepped closer to Grace. "They're happy again," he said softly. Grace smiled. "Children bloom when love replaces fear." He nodded. "And you help them bloom." She turned back to the window. "I didn't do it alone, sir. You let them see your heart." Mr. Caleb hesitated. "I was thinking, maybe it's time we move forward with that idea we talked about, the foundation." Grace looked surprised. "You're serious about it?" He smiled faintly. "Completely. I already spoke with a few people. They're willing to help fund it." Her heart stirred. "Then let's do it right. Not just another rich man's charity. A real place. A home for kids who never had one." He nodded. "And I want your name on it, too." Grace blinked. "Mine?" "Yes. Caleb Grace Foundation for Healing." She went quiet, touched in a way words couldn't describe. "You don't need to, I do," he interrupted gently. "You were the one who taught us how to heal." For a moment, she couldn't speak. Her eyes shimmered softly, not from pride, but from humility. The weeks turned into months. The foundation grew from an idea to reality. The first branch opened in Brooklyn. In an old community building they rebuilt from the ground up. Bright murals covered the walls. Children's laughter echoed through rooms filled with books, paints, and soft pillows. Grace walked through the halls every day, greeting the children by name. She listened to their stories, their fear, their loss, their hope. She never rushed them. She just sat, held their hands, and let silence heal what words couldn't. Mr. Caleb visited often. He helped organize donations, spoke at events, but he always stayed in the background when Grace was around. She belonged to this world of small hearts and gentle voices. One afternoon, as she was teaching the children how to plant small flowers in the garden behind the center, Ethan and Ryan came running toward her with muddy hands. "Look, Grace, ours are growing." She laughed, wiping their cheeks. "Because you cared for them, that's how things grow." From a short distance, Mr. Caleb watched her how she moved, how the children trusted her, how peace followed her everywhere she went. Margaret came up beside him, smiling. "She changed all of you," she said. He nodded. "Yes, she saved us." A few weeks later, they held the official opening ceremony of the foundation. The hall was filled with families, foster children, teachers, and volunteers. A large banner read Caleb Grace Foundation for Healing. Grace stood on stage, her hands trembling slightly as she faced the crowd. She wasn't used to microphones or attention, but her voice came out steady. "I came from a place where people thought kindness was weakness," she said, "where I was told that my job was to clean, not to care. But I learned something here sometimes. Healing begins with listening. Sometimes, love looks like staying when others leave." The audience was silent. Some wiped tears. Mr. Caleb watched from the front row, his chest heavy with pride and quiet gratitude. Grace smiled softly. "This foundation isn't about us. It's about every child who thought their voice didn't matter. Every heart that's still learning how to trust again. We built this to prove that broken things can still become beautiful." When she stepped down, the crowd stood up in applause. Ethan and Ryan ran to hug her legs. Mr. Caleb rose slowly, meeting her halfway. "You did it," he whispered. "We did it," she said. That night, after everyone left, Grace stood outside the building, looking up at the sign glowing in soft light. Mr. Caleb joined her, his coat draped loosely over his shoulders. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "It's peaceful," she replied. "For the first time in my life, I feel like I belong somewhere." He looked at her, his voice low. "You've always belonged, Grace. You just needed the world to see it." She turned to face him. For a long moment, neither spoke. The city lights flickered softly around them, and the sound of traffic faded in the distance. "You don't owe me anything," she said gently. "I know," he replied, "but I want to give something anyway." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a bracelet, simple silver, with a tiny bird charm hanging from it. Grace stared at it, tears filling her eyes. "A bird?" He nodded. "Freedom, because that's what you gave all of us." Her lips trembled. "Mr. Caleb A. Call me Caleb," he said softly. She smiled faintly, brushing a tear away. "Thank you, Caleb." Months later, the foundation became a beacon of hope across New York. Schools partnered with them, families volunteered, and children who once feared love began to smile again. But at home, the change was quieter, deeper. The twins no longer had nightmares. They drew pictures of their family, 4 people, holding hands under a bright sun. "At the bottom," Ethan wrote, "Our forever home." Grace framed it and hung it in the hallway. One evening, while tucking the boys in, Caleb looked at Grace across the room. Their eyes met, soft and sure. "Stay," he whispered. She hesitated. "For how long?" He smiled gently. "As long as peace stays." She nodded, her heart full. "Then I'm not leaving." The next morning, sunlight spilled over the Caleb mansion. The twins played in the garden, their laughter echoing through the air. Grace watered the roses near the porch, the same roses she once saw the night she first arrived, standing outside in the rain, afraid and alone. Caleb walked out, rolling his sleeves, smiling as he joined her. Together, they planted a small sapling beside the old rose bush. "What's this one for?" he asked. "For tomorrow," she said. "So when they grow older, they'll see what love can build." He placed his hand gently over hers. "Then we'll water it together." Grace looked at him, her eyes warm. "Always?" The wind moved softly through the garden, carrying the laughter of the boys and the promise of new beginnings. And for the first, every heart inside that home was finally at peace. Dear viewers, this story wasn't just about a maid and a millionaire, it was about how love can heal even the deepest wounds. Grace walked into that mansion with nothing but a kind heart, and that heart changed everything. She taught a grieving man how to feel again, showed two broken boys how to smile again, and reminded us all that real strength lies in forgiveness. No amount of wealth can buy peace, but one act of compassion can rebuild a whole home. If this story touched you, don't just watch, share it, because someone out there needs to be reminded that kindness still wins. Comment "Grace healed them" if you believe love changes lives. Like this video to support real human stories. And subscribe for more powerful stories that prove no matter how dark life gets, grace always finds a way.